We saw some divisions on that stage, very visible. You could hear them, and a big one was generational. And listening to it, watching it, it occurs to me the most indelible picture of the evening may be a photo we've never seen of a young girl in Berkeley, California named Kamala at the bus stop on her way to school. That is to say, it was on that point that she forged a moment against the frontrunner, Joe Biden, who was careful to begin with Donald Trump. He was careful to try to end strong. But that is likely our plot line tonight. Nicole Wallace.
I agree with that. I believe that what happened tonight will erase in most people's mind what happened last night. That's not to take anything away from any of the men and women who stood on that stage, but I think there was a very different feeling about tonight from Joe Biden's very first response in which he invoked and attacked Donald Trump, which was something our friend Joy Reid said the Democratic Party is hungry for. I think they were all much more closer to the beating pulse of the hopes and desires of really the most sort of urgently desperate to beat Donald Trump wing of the Democratic Party. And I think we talked about it a lot leading into this debate. Kamala Harris has not yet been showcased in a moment that did not elevate her. And we talked about the Barr hearings where she didn't just stand out, she changed the dynamics of that event. She changed the dynamics of this event and perhaps the Democratic primary tonight.
Joy Reid.
Well, I'm actually looking at who's crowding around these candidates at the end, and you see a throng of black women flocking around Kamala Harris. A good thing for her. Pete Buttigieg is a throng not as diverse. I think tonight these candidates had two jobs. There are 22 people in the debates, 24 people running. Job number one, start eliminating some people. Start to take down some of the other candidates. It's a game of Survivor. I know they're all friends and colleagues, and they all like each other and largely agree, but you've got to start trying to eliminate people and others in the minds of these voters who are really struggling to pick someone. And I think the second job, give us a vision in our minds of what it would look like for you to debate Donald Trump. And I think the one person who gave us that very clear picture of what it would look like for them to go up against Donald Trump head to head was Kamala Harris. She had a strategy. She had the courage to actually attack Joe Biden. She was one of the few who went after him head on. She destabilized him on the race question. He didn't seem to know how to answer. And she took on Donald Trump directly, including back to Biden, a bank shot off of Barack Obama, which is like heresy in the Democratic Party. She did a bank shot off of Barack Obama's deportation policy to hit that man, Joe Biden, on immigration. That was brave, and it went very well for her.
You keep talking about Survivor, though. I mean, is this an urgent thing or just something that has to happen? You just want to see it winnowed down so that the frontrunners get more attention?
Absolutely. This isn't, in 2016 in the Republican field, there were 17 people running, but only one celebrity. In this instance, you have a lot of voters who kind of like them all, right? I know people who are like, I like a little bit about Buttigieg. I like a little bit about Biden. I kind of think Biden is the only one who can win, so he may not be my favorite, but I may have to go with him. I like a little bit about Kamala Harris, but I also like a little Warren. People are trying to make up their minds. There are 24 of them. You've got to stand out in a way that people start to separate somebody from the field. And tonight, Kirsten Gillibrand, kudos for staying in it because she was the other woman there and she managed to stay in the game. But Kamala Harris presented herself essentially as a frontrunner tonight.
Former Democratic colleague of Kamala Harris in the Senate, Claire McCaskill.
Yeah, I think Kamala obviously had a big night tonight. I do think so did Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I thought he handled himself well. I thought he showed that he deserves some of the attention he's getting. You compare his performance to Beto's last night, I think his was substantively better. I think he delivered in a calm way. I could see him also debating Donald Trump. But no question, and if you look at the time each one of them spent talking, Joe Biden was obviously at the top because he responded to a lot of attacks. But who was number two? Kamala Harris. Who was number three? Bernie Sanders. Four was, in fact, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And even though Kirsten tried, she tried to do what I would maybe characterize at the beginning almost a de Blasio, right? Breaking in, trying to get the attention. I think she ended up only with, 7.5 minutes of total time talking. So it is time to narrow this field. I mean, I think we could get it down to 5 or 6 right now and have some really good debates, really strong candidates, and this party could decide who is the right one to take this mess in the Oval Office out.
Contributors have a funny way of narrowing the field. Lawrence O'Donnell.
I think it was Kamala Harris's debate in that this was the front runners debate. It was Joe Biden, the debate where you had the really, really strong front runner. And so the question became, who can beat this front runner? That's the first question that was in the air in any of these debates before you get to the question of going up against Donald Trump. And so Senator Harris decided, and it was clearly a decision, to go straight at Joe Biden. There was very clearly something she knew she was going to do. She did it very well. She did it very strongly, using Joe Biden's history on school busing in the United States Senate, which is, it's hard to imagine that you're in an election in the 21st century that refers back to the 1970s in the United States Senate. But that's what you get when you have this kind of longevity in a candidate. And so she really, I think, had some extraordinary exchanges there, was very, very powerful on immigration, very powerful on other issues. And so if the candidate in this group tonight who I think helped herself the most was Kamala Harris.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.